My name is Karen Trivett, and I am Head of Special Collections and College Archives in the Gladys Marcus Library at the Fashion Institute of Technology, SUNY, or FIT. Welcome to another installment of the FIT Talks series, the oral history program of FIT. Today is January 30th, 2017, and it's roughly 20 minutes after 12 noon. I'm interviewing Professor Alfred V. Sloan, Jr., former fashion business management professor at FIT. He has graciously invited us into his home located at 165 East 72nd Street in Manhattan, New York. Thank you, Professor Sloan, for taking the time to speak with us today.
It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. For context, if you will, please tell researchers a little bit about your childhood.
A little bit about my
childhood.
A normal, happy childhood, as far as I know. I was born in Christmas Eve, 1921, and my dad had a medical practice at that time in roughly the central Bronx. Dad had come out of the Army in World War I as a surgeon, and married my mother almost immediately thereafter. And she happened to be a neighbor, so it was an easy match, and set up a medical office in a brownstone, 1075 West Farms Road, if that's of any help to you. And the interesting thing is that in the brownstone, Dad's medical office was on floor 1. We lived on floor 2, easy to get to work in the morning. Mm-hmm. And on floor 3, my mother's brother and his recent wife lived and eventually with their 2 girls, their 2 children. He had just come out of the Navy. Dad had just come out of the Army. It was common in those days, and we're always a close family, so that it worked out just fine. So the brother-in-law had 2 girls. Our family was 2 boys. Regretfully, my younger brother, who was about 4 years younger than I was lost in the war. It was a very, very sad thing. He was lost in the assault on the Rhine with the 65th Division, and never saw his 20th birthday. Oh, my. It was a difficult thing, yeah. And particularly difficult for my parents, needless to say, and it was possibly the most disastrous part of my life. Mm. And I was thankful that I had survived the war, and at least one of us came back in normal shape. That's right. And it's worth saying that right off the bat.
Yes.
Sure.
As a child, did you have aspirations, or did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Not particularly. Mm. Not particularly. Dad was a comfortable middle-class doctor. He was a GP, general practitioner, mm-hmm. the kind that made house calls. Oh. And from the time I was about 7 or 8 or 9 years old, he took me along on these house calls. Sometimes I had to sit in the car and wait for him. Other times he took me upstairs with him to the patient's apartment, and I waited in an anteroom while he took care of Mr. or Mrs., whichever it was, and or the child. An interesting point, my dad was not an obstetrician, but in the second summer of his practice, which would have been 1920, In that particular year, he delivered nearly 60 children.
What?
And he's not an obstetrician.
Oh my goodness.
But you went to the GP for everything in those days, for everything. And Dad said this was not at all uncommon.
It doesn't sound like it. My goodness,
wow.
60 children.
Now to get your left toenail cut, you go to a specialist.
It's true. It's true. How would you describe your formal education?
It was a good one. I went to the public schools in New York, originally in the Bronx and later in Manhattan when the family moved to Manhattan in 1933. I was at that point about 12 years old. I had the good fortune twice. Number one, of going to a rapid advance class in a junior high school in Manhattan here. Rapid advance essentially meant you did 3 years in 2, which doesn't exist anymore.
No.
They won't let you do it. You did the 3 years, the grades, as I recall, 7, 8, and 9 in 2 years.
Wow.
And then I had a second great break. I was admitted after an examination to Townsend Harris High School, which at that point in time, was probably the most selective high school in New York City. I say selective because Stuyvesant was still an area high school in lower Manhattan. Bronx Science hadn't been opened yet, and what else was there? There was Brooklyn Tech, but we always considered ourselves superior.
Oh, lovely.
Lovely. So I had the good fortune of going to Townsend Harris. Now, Townsend Harris was a school that put the 4 years into 3.
Oh.
So I lost a year in junior high school, a year growing up, and lost a year at Townsend Harris High School, from which I graduated in 1937.
Goodness.
Okay. And then it became necessary for me to go to college. At least I presumed it was necessary. And Dad was a doctor. Mother was a college graduate. Mother had earned the, I have to be careful about this, the bachelor's degree at Teachers College, Columbia. In those days, TC was an undergraduate school, or gave an undergraduate degree. Doesn't anymore. In fact, it ceased doing it 5 or 6 years after Mother left. But in 1920, Mother earned the bachelor's degree from Teachers College. And when it came time to apply for colleges, the normal application was to Columbia. Why? Mother was a Columbia graduate. Dad had 2 degrees from Columbia.
Wow.
A Master of Arts degree and the MD degree, the medical degree. I was 15 years old, or 15 and a half years old, and they turned me down.
Oh no.
Yeah, with 2 parents. As I reflect upon it, Columbia made the right decision. I was a kid, fairly bright kid, not the brightest in the world by any means, but a fairly bright kid of good family and so on. But I was 15 and a half years old. Columbia did say, you may reapply next year. It wasn't a complete shutting of the door. But Dad wasn't having any of this.
Oh.
And Mother never got over it.
No.
That her wonderful son was turned down by her alma mater.
Oh.
Dad said, I've seen worse things in my life. He'd been through the war and whatnot. Okay, so it became necessary to apply to other colleges. I applied to Cornell, rejected.
Oh.
I applied to Swarthmore, rejected. Oh, I was doing very well. My father was a little surprised, but he says these things happen. I applied to one other school which also rejected me, and it was a quality school. Well, Columbia was the third school, actually. I'm adding it in now after the event. Yeah, so 3 for 3.
Gosh.
I was doing very well. My dad said, where are we going to stick this boy?
Yeah.
He got himself an interview with the then editor of the New York Times, Dr. Finley. The Finley Walk on the east side is named after him. Dr. Finley, who had been state education commissioner, Dr. Finley, Dad said, he said, will you speak to my son and give him some ideas of what might be a respectable college to apply to? Emphasis on respectable. Okay. I got down to Dr. Finley's office at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning in the old New York Times building.
Yes.
The building is still up, you know, the one they drop the balloon from every New Year's Eve.
Is that in the 40s?
At 42nd Street,
42nd
right on
Street,
Times
right.
Square. At that time, the paper was published there. Walked into Dr. Finley's office, 8 a.m. Dad said, don't you be late. He said, he'll give you 15 minutes and that's all you get. Walked in, and behind Dr. Finley is the American flag that Commodore Peary had carried to the North Pole, and a couple of other flags, and I'm a kid. I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
Dr. Finley said, take a seat, young man. Good. He said, what's the last book you've read?
Ooh.
Well, I was embarrassed to tell him.
Oh.
I was embarrassed to tell him. But I said to myself, I better not fake this guy. He's smarter than I am. I said, it was a book on football by Walter Camp. Walter Camp was a great coach in his day, and had written a book for boys, basically, about football. He said, what's the book you read before that?
Oh.
Excuse me. Okay, I knew the answer to that one. It was the sinking of the Titanic,
Okay.
of course. Well, that was a little bit more general knowledge. And then Dr. Finley said to me, he said, which subjects in high school do you dislike the most? Oh, that was easy.
Oh.
I said, science and math. And he said, which do you like the most? I said, English and history. Asked me one or two other questions and said, go home now. He says, I will telephone your father before you get home and give him my thinking as to what might be an appropriate college for you, Alfred. Yes, sir. And I thanked him very much, and I took the subway home and so forth. And by the time I got home, I said, Dad, have you heard from Dr. Finley yet? Yes, I have. He said, about 10, 20 minutes ago. What did he recommend? He said, send the boy to Rutgers.
Oh!
It was a sensational pick because it was the right college for the right boy at the right time.
Excellent.
Rutgers was an old school, 8th oldest in the United States, pre-revolutionary, respected, not the greatest, but in the next rank.
Respectable.
Very respectable, very respectable. Send the boy to Rutgers. I got to Rutgers, I was running with the middle of the pack, you know, right. Some guys were smarter, some guys were more stupid, just getting by. I was in the center, had a great time, had a great 4 years, a great 4 years. I joined a fraternity. I played 150-pound football. That's lightweight football. You had to be under 152 pounds to qualify to play. Yeah. I was on the debating team eventually, and just had a wonderful time for 4 years, and rather interesting. By the time I got out, my grades had gone up.
Very good.
I started, for example, in my freshman year, I had 4 D's. But in the same subject, chemistry.
Well,
you had to pick a science. And I stupidly picked chemistry, something I had no background in. I should have taken geology, which everybody else took, and gotten my C and gotten past it. I got D, 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 D. And I'm sure that at least 3 of those 4 D's were gifts that should have been F. They must say, well, he's not a bad kid. He's doing all right in his other studies. He's got a brace of C's and B's, and he's all right. And keep him in the college. My father was ashamed of me being a doctor in chemistry. I mean, that was second nature to him.
Oh, goodness.
But there you go. And then what was interesting, during my senior year, I got interested in potentially going to law school. Bright guys, majored in poli-sci, majored in history.
Was that your major?
History and political science.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, combined.
Yes.
And pure liberal arts, law school. I'm very proud of this. I applied to 4 law schools and was admitted to 4.
Wow.
And let me tell you the names of the 4. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Cornell.
Excellent. Wow.
So I must have learned something at dear old Rutgers.
Yes.
I must have learned that selection was just a wonderful one. Again, the right boy at the right time.
Of course. Had it ever been on your radar before?
Very lightly. I mean, it, along with maybe 10 other schools. I mean, I knew of the school. I followed football. I knew the football tradition of Rutgers, but that's about all I knew. I knew it was in New Jersey. Some of my father's friends didn't even know it was in New Jersey. It sounded like Ohio or West Virginia. And there you go.
So what year did you graduate?
1941.
1941.
Entered in 37, graduated in 41. And before I had a real shot at any of the law schools, I was in the military, and the rest is the history of World War II.
Well, what about your time serving the country. Can you tell us a little bit about that time and that experience?
Yes. They put me, originally I was in the Coast Artillery, but quickly shifted over when they moved lots of people into the fast-growing Air Force. Now, I wasn't qualified to fly because my eyes didn't, my eyes were not bad, but they could not hit the visual qualifications for pilot, navigator, bombardier, or what have you. I became a signalman and went through the signals course, and I'm trying to think. I got overseas fairly early. I got overseas in 1943. I was with the 445th Bombardment Group. My rank after arriving overseas was up to Staff Sergeant. I was a platoon sergeant, basically in a signal unit, and that's where I met the officer who made a suggestion about my becoming a teacher and so forth.
Yes.
Yeah, and the main achievement that I had that hit me during the war was something that I really did not deserve at all. It was the award of the Croix de Guerre, the French award by the French government, but it was a unit award, not to Alfred Sloan himself, but to Alfred Sloan's unit. And Alfred Sloan, being part of that unit, was entitled to wear the Croix de Guerre. I can show you the diploma if you want to walk into the back and take a look at it. It's next to my Rutgers diploma. That's about the proudest one I've got.
Oh, that would be lovely.
If you'd like to see it any time now or later.
Maybe later.
Later, fine.
Yes, sir.
Be delighted to show it to you.
Thank you.
It's hanging on the wall of the back bedroom.
Oh, perfect.
And when my wife saw me put it up, I said, "It's staying there."
That seems reasonable. So, any other reflections on your time serving the country?
I did have a stretch from late 1943 when the unit sent me to the Royal Air Force for 2.5 or 3 months. It was the autumn-winter of that year, to learn RAF signal procedure, because it was during World War II, the RAF controlled signal operations in Britain. Remember that we were not on the continent yet in 43. We were still in the UK. And just like US Navy controlled the signal procedure in the South Pacific, the RAF controlled it in Britain. And I served with the RAF for just under 3 months at the end of 43, and enjoyed it a great deal, by the way. Made a lot of friends, and a couple of amusing things happened. The day of my arrival, I had arrived at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and dinner was around 6 o'clock, I guess. And I lined up for dinner with everybody else. Sergeant, you don't eat with the enlisted men, you eat in the sergeant's mess.
Oh.
What the hell are you talking about? I said, this is not the United States Army, this is the Royal Air Force. Privates, or as they call them, aircraftsmen and leading aircraftsmen, had the largest mess. There was a very small corporal's mess. There was an equally tiny sergeant's mess. And finally there was an officer's mess. I had to eat in the sergeant's mess.
Wow.
Which wasn't all that bad.
Yeah.
Because there were only about 8, 9, 10, 11 of us on the base, sergeant, all British or Australian, Canadian perhaps. An interesting thing was they waited on us.
Oh.
There were 2 WAFs, a WAF, W-A-A-F. The 2 WAFs who were our private waitresses. We didn't even have to go for our food. It was brought. I said to myself, my God, in the United States Army, even the officers don't eat this well. They still have to go on a chow line. So I had a good time with the RAF and made many good friends. And 1 or 2 are still alive today, whom I'm still in touch with.
Excellent.
I'm still in touch with them, and their families, and their grandchildren, and so forth and so forth.
That's lovely.
But there you go.
Excellent. Very interesting. What was your first job out of the service?
My first job out of the service, I needed to find employment, and I found employment. My father insists that I go to graduate school in the evening. He says, get yourself a master's degree. He said, please, he says, you never know when it's going to come in handy. But I got to work. I found a job in Philadelphia with a department store. A department store which had been founded in 1864, 1866, Strawbridge Clothier, a fine, old, lovely department store. Something like Altman's used to be like in New York, that quality goods. I found myself a position there, and I stayed with them and their New York office for approximately 10 years.
Oh, goodness.
I didn't go right into teaching, but in the meanwhile, number 1, I got the master's degree from NYU. Okay.
In what subject?
The overall subject was Master of Science in Retailing.
Oh.
Master of Science in Retail, a degree that the university no longer gives. Earned the degree in 1950 and continued on wisely, probably my father's insistence, for the doctorate.
Oh, very good.
And it took another 10 years before I could earn it, because it was all part-time. It was all, and I was informed a few years ago that NYU doesn't even give part-time doctoral degrees. If you want a PhD from NYU, son, you go down there and register full-time and take your courses. And,
oh, goodness.
But it worked to my advantage. I'm sure my grades were good. I'm sure I got breaks from the faculty being an ex-serviceman. I'm sure we all did. And I did finally earn the doctoral degree. As soon as I was approaching the doctoral degree, I was on the last step. I was on the dissertation step. I switched over to teaching.
Oh.
And I finally hit teaching. And let's see the year. The year would have been I'd say, let me give it to you accurately if I can. 1956. Remember, I was out of the service in 45, 46, 10 years later, getting very close to the doctoral degree, and I found a job, interesting, which I could commute to, even though it was 65 miles away.
Oh.
The job was in Middletown, New York, with a school that calls itself today SUNY Orange.
Oh.
But in those days was known as Orange County Community College, a unit of the State University of New York, like FIT.
Yes, sir.
And I hooked in there and had a great time. At the end of 2 years, I put in 2 years, and in those days, your third year was your contract year, and I was on my way to getting a contract for life. Third year, I got a call from FIT.
Oh.
Would you come down and talk to us? Sure, I'll come down and talk to you.
Do you remember who made the call?
Yes, I do. The call was made either by Dean Sloanum, S-L-O-N-I-M, Molly Sloanum. It was either made by Molly Sloanum. I'm almost sure it was she. Come down, we want to talk to you. I came down, I met the chairman of the department, the redoubtable Jeanette Jarno, who had started the FBM department only a couple of years earlier.
Wow.
And the classes were starting to spread out, and she needed somebody else. And stayed with Jeanette Jarno, and Dr. Bethel had to clear me. Interviewed me at the Yale Club, by the way.
Wow.
A very classy interview.
Very, very.
Meet me at the Yale Club. And I met him at the Yale Club, and he says, the job only pays so much, and he mentioned an amount. The amount was $5,000. $5,000 a year. Okay. I accepted it. Dr. Bethel had a couple of scotches while he was talking to me. I took nothing stronger than ginger ale. I'm smart enough to do that interview. And by the time that Dr. Bethel had finished the second scotch, the price had jumped to $5,100.
Oh, excellent.
An extra $100. He had forgotten he'd said $5,000.
Oh, goodness.
And he evidently could afford $5,100.
That was certainly to your advantage.
That was to my advantage.
Yes,
well,
sir.
think of it as a percentage of $5,000.
Yes. And this was Lawrence Bethel?
Lawrence Bethel, the famous Lawrence Bethel, with whom I had a lovely relationship, and then the next 58 years were at FIT.
Amazing.
So I had 2 at Orange County, 58 at FIT, both under the State University of New York, as you know. So that, and the 60 years were full-time.
Amazing.
Were full-time. Not amazing, but...
I think so.
Interesting thing. When I finished the first 30 years, people said, well, now you can retire. You're 64 years old. You've put in 30 years as a professor, and I had already reached full professor rank. You retire now, and I was thinking of doing it. I said, what the hell, I feel well.
Yeah.
I don't know what I would do otherwise. I'll stick it out for a few years more. And next thing you know was 30 years more.
Oh, goodness.
30 and 30 makes 60.
Yes.
So I had the full 60 years of full-time teaching, no part-time teaching. And one day, this was 8 or 10 years ago, Professor Godnick and I sat down. He said, how many students have you actually taught? He said, full-time, part-time, evening programs. If you taught during the summer, added in. If you taught overseas, as I had briefly a couple of times, add that in. He says, how many students have sat in front of you? And we worked up a number. It was rather interesting. Of course, it was a round number. We don't really know. We have no way of really knowing. But it was a fairly A moderately accurate round number, 24,000.
Oh my goodness.
24,000.
Oh.
See, I'm entitled to forget a name now and then.
Exactly. Entitled for sure. Do you remember when you first started at FIT, were you teaching at the high school or was it on 27th Street?
Good morning. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
Good question. Physically, we were in the high school.
Mm-hmm.
I started teaching at FIT in the September of 1958, after 2 years at Orange County. We opened our first unit, you might say, the C building,
Mm-hmm.
only the first 4 floors of the C building, because the rest they were still putting in windows and on April 1st of 1959.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up teaching basically 1 year, almost 1 year, in the old, what we call the old high school.
Mm-hmm. On 24th Street.
On 24th Street. And the time after the switch, or the time at
Very good.
227 West 27th.
Yes. Do you remember what the first year's classes were that you taught?
I had them on my bulletin board until I retired.
Oh, goodness.
It was the second semester of the first year. I do have a rough idea. This is at a bit of a guess, but moderately accurate. I taught Business 101, whatever it was called. We've changed numbers 100 times,
Mm-hmm.
but I taught a basic business course and may have taken 2 sections of it.
Mm-hmm.
In those days, we taught 5 classes, not 4.
Wow.
We taught 5. And I taught merchandise math, which amused my father. He said 4 Ds in mathematics at Rutgers, and 3 of them were gifts. I said, Pop, I'm very good with practical numbers. I'm very good at arithmetic. It's when I get into algebra and trig and geometry, I have problems. But merchandise math is arithmetic.
Yeah.
Is arithmetic. And I could tell you some funny stories today, because now in class I would say, what is 9 times 7? And the kids go for the 9 times 7. Come on.
Scary.
I had to memorize that when I was 8 years old.
Yes, exactly.
But that's another story. I won't get into that.
Well, how did your career at FIT change over the years in terms of what you taught? And
Not a great deal.
Okay.
Not a great deal. That's the interesting thing. I always taught a business course, a marketing course, a course in the merchandise math became my staple, and I would take 1 and 2 sections of that regularly. I would say of the 5 classes I taught, 3 or 4 were, in a sense, repetitious. And it was easy to stay abreast of the field. I mean, not just through publications and so on, but through our wonderful set of adjuncts.
Yes.
Because the adjuncts are in the market all the time, and they are coming to college at 6 o'clock in the evening, and you have a cup of coffee with them, what's new, what's happening. A very good way of staying abreast. And I'm now, or was until I retired, in a department that had roughly 100 professors.
Amazing.
In round numbers, and you have to take it as round numbers.
Sure.
About 35 were full-time instructors, like I was. About 65 were part-time. But rather interestingly, it was the part-time instructors that gave us real strength, because they came not only from the market, but they came recently from the market. and kept us up to date
Freshness.
as to what was happening. And we, in our department, the FBM department, we've always had a marvelous bunch of adjuncts, a marvelous bunch. And some of them are my best friends and so forth.
Excellent. Is there a particular class that stands out to you? A semester's worth of experience that stands out as prominent?
Well, if you mean any one semester, not so much, but across the board, the business arithmetic course. You can call it business arithmetic. We call it merchandise mathematics and so on. And I always tell the students, I was terrible at this stuff when I was in college. Not even in high school, poor, but terrible in college. But I said, it can be done. I said, if you keep your mouth shut and listen to me, and if you don't understand, get your hand up. And I've been pretty successful at that, except with the foreign students who are hesitant to put their hand up and say, would you please explain that? And I know they're having trouble.
Sure.
Occasionally, not all of them by any means. Not all by any means.
And speaking of foreign students, you mentioned you taught abroad.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that experience.
We had a hook-in, which I'm proud to say I had some part in developing, with a school in London which was not dissimilar to FIT. If you threw out the design side and focused on the business side, the school is called the College for the Distributive Trades, CDT. Horrible name, a horrible name, but a good school. And essentially they were teaching, with some extra flourishes, essentially they were teaching what we taught. And in the it wouldn't have been the early 1960s, it would have been the middle to late 1960s, I got the idea of sending a select group of students over to the CDT to study for one semester.
Nice.
Fortunately, Professor Jarno, who was the chairman, agreed with me and said, they'll learn something. Just living abroad, they'll learn something. So we made connections. I won't go into the details. We made connections with the CDT to take 4 students a semester. And the students competed like hell for these 4 spots.
I'll bet.
Because we guaranteed them that no matter what the CDT threw at them in the way of courses, they would get full credit for it in advance.
Wow.
In other words, you're going abroad to represent FIT. We think enough of you. You're going to come back with 15 credit hours. Win, lose, or draw. Well, the girls, mainly girls, the girls told me a great story. They said one of the courses we had to take, and several were a little bit out of their normal reach. One of the courses we had to take was elements of the Scottish law.
Oh, goodness. That seems a bit obscure.
And here's a fashion student from New York.
Yes.
I said, stick with it, do as well as you can. You're getting credit for it anyway, and don't create a fuss. Look smart. And we were able to send 52 or 54 such students abroad.
Wow.
You can divide 4 into 54, and it goes around 13 times.
Yes.
For 13 years we were able to do this, and we were only stopped when Maggie Thatcher became Prime Minister, because she then required all foreign students to pay the full costs of their education, which not only doubled and tripled it, but I think quintupled it, which of course killed the program.
Yeah.
Because we had made the arrangements that the students selected, these 4 selected students, they would pay their tuition FIT and have nothing to pay on the other side. And we had a wonderful relationship with the College for the Distributive Trades, and to at a later date with the London College of Fashion.
Yes.
And this, of course, brought in other elements of fashion, design particularly, and so forth. So, and you might say I was instrumental in hooking into both. But you see, I'd been in the RAF.
Yes.
And I was pulling on these wartime experiences. And it just happened that the principal of the College for Distributive Trades was a former squadron leader in the RAF. So we got along just fine.
Excellent.
And there you go.
That's
there you
fascinating.
Go.
So you mentioned retirement. When did you retire?
I retired officially Christmas Eve of 2016.
Okay.
Which means I'm retired a little bit over a year. Technically, I retired. Excuse me. Technically, I retired in, I think, April 1st or March 31st of 2017 because the college pay year extended until March or until April 1st or something. So, but I'm basically retired a little over a year as far as being outside of classes.
And to segue just a little bit, tell us a little bit about your family now, and in the recent past since you left service and was at FIT. Tell us like your marital history and your children, if you have any.
Yeah. Okay. Married Anita in 1956. And she got along so well with my mother, who lived in this building, by the way, that people who did not know us too well thought she was the daughter of and I was the guy she married. It was a great relationship. It was a great. Now, we had one child, Alfred V, named after my father, not after me, named after my father, my late father. And he attended the New York City public schools until grade 6. At grade 6, switched over to the McBurney, which was a prep school run by the YMCA. Out of the Y building on 63rd Street and near Central Park West, between Central Park West and Columbus Avenue. Yeah, and he was a moderately good student. I say moderate, like I. He was never in trouble, and had weaknesses, had strengths, and somehow talked his way into Columbia. Now, a school that I couldn't get into.
Oh, goodness.
And my mother, of course, said, retribution at least. They didn't take my son, they took my grandson. Talked himself into Columbia. He was not that good a student, actually. When I say good student, he wasn't a great student or a brain, or his interests, like mine, were in sports, and I still have dinner with him 5 or 6 nights a week.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, yes. He's just go downstairs, and what do you think we do when we're having dinner? We watch baseball.
Of course.
Unless it's February or March, and then we await baseball. And he himself became a teacher.
Oh, very good.
And became a teacher of little children,
of
little kids. I said, that's right, you and they are on the same level. Kindergarten and pre-kindergarten and grade 1 and 2. I think he's qualified technically up to high school, but it was only taught in the grade schools.
And where does he teach?
Well, where did he teach?
Where did he teach?
He taught at a numerous collection of mainly private schools, mainly in tough parts of the city, in Harlem, in Washington Heights, in 1 or 2 other places that a lot of guys would have avoided. He liked it. Got along fine with people and has an easygoing nature.
Very good.
Yeah, nothing bothers him too much, for which I'm very thankful.
Very good. So turning the focus back onto you, I'm going to ask you a few questions that are a bit more abstract. What person had the most positive influence on your life, and what did he or she do to influence you?
Well, on reflection, I would probably have to say my parents. Now, to pick one parent, not the other, is ridiculous. I mean, it's both parents. They were both educated people. They were both kindly people. They were helpful to others. They were nice people.
Very good.
And whereas I know that whatever achievements I've had do not compare to my father's with his medical achievements, but I do the best I can, at least not to be a disgrace to my parents.
Aww. I think you more than satisfied that requirement.
I hope I do, and I hope Dad is listening up in heaven somewhere.
I'm sure he is. I'm sure he is. Do you remember someone saying something to you that had a big impact on how you lived your life? Who said it, and what did that person say?
It sounds too philosophical.
True.
You know, I mentioned the conversation I had with the platoon lieutenant who said, hey, Sloan, you'd be a good teacher, and all those holidays, you love it. And, maybe that wasn't the most stirring moment of my life. I did listen to my teachers in general. In grade school, in high school, in college, university. On the whole, I had great respect for them. 1 or 2 I didn't like, but the great majority I had substantial respect for. It's a hard question to ask, to pick a person that would give me a piece of advice. Maybe without meaning to, John Houston Finley said, send the boy to Rutgers. I mean, he didn't do it in the sense that you're thinking, but maybe that had the greatest effect, because Rutgers led to other things and so forth.
Yes.
But I only spent 15 minutes with John Houston Finley.
Well, but we were also saying earlier that impact doesn't take a long time.
No, it's true.
So, as a librarian and archivist, I have to ask you, what book influenced you most?
I do a lot of reading. Last year I read 24 books. That's about an average for me.
Wow.
A book every 2 weeks. Yeah, I do a lot of reading, but it's fun reading. I'm not trying to get smarter. A book, let me look at the library up there.
Yeah. You did mention a title earlier that had to do with the Titanic.
Well, yes. any of the Titanic stories would have had an influence on me about this great majestic ship hitting an iceberg and going down.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I pretty much devoured the novels of C.P. Snow.
I'm not familiar.
C.P. Snow, the English literary man, who wrote a great deal during the, well, even in the 50s, but mainly 60s, 70s, and 80s, and well thought. I think Charles Percy Snow was his full name. Yeah, would have had an influence on me.
That's fine. I just, it's a curiosity I have when I talk to someone.
Yeah, to pick one book would be difficult.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of books, because I read so many books, and so many are on light subjects. I mean, I've just finished one by David Lodge. David Lodge was a popular English author, still is, I believe. Wrote 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 books, humorous, but not the end of the world.
Yes, yes.
And that's the kind of stuff I enjoy.
Well, speaking of things you enjoy, what are your future plans?
Well, keep living for one thing. And help others as much as I can. I have tried to give advice on college selection to a lot of young people, and I'll hope to continue to be able to do that. And to stay in touch with my old colleagues at FIT and elsewhere. And I said I'm still in touch with some of those from Middletown, New York, and and that's been 58 years.
Yes.
Or 59, whatever. Yeah.
Do you, on reflection, especially given your tenure at FIT, is there something you want people to remember about you specifically?
Well, that he was a reasonably fun guy to have in class, yes. I never took it too seriously. Yeah, I would say that. And that he was sharp when it came to sports memorabilia.
Oh, nice.
I would often, but a lot of that was lost because the classes were mainly female, and I was over their heads. If I said, "Do you remember when Tony Cuccinelli helped pull off this double play that won the World Series?" Well, you know, they didn't know what I was talking about.
Oh no.
Yeah, a lot of it was lost. The few who got it, I think, reasonably well.
Excellent.
But.
Did you find an alternative audience for that kind of discussion?
Not really. No. I stuck pretty much. I mean, you take what's given to you.
Right.
Here we are with a class of 27 students, and 25 are women. You try to play it their way a little bit, but not to be unkind either. I mean, and to be understanding, and to recognize. Some veteran teacher, whoever it was, taught me this. At any one moment, 20% of the class is sleeping. Sleeping meaning thinking of something else. The date last night, or tomorrow night, or trouble with an instructor, or boyfriend. He says, and you can count on it. That's why you have to repeat important principles. And whether you're teaching the multiplication table or marketing techniques, If it's important, you better say it in 2 or 3 different ways while you're in class. Just one of them will catch on.
Very good. One last question.
Sure.
What question didn't I ask you that you wish I had?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Or would you like to offer any closing words to the students and scholars who will be looking at?
Well, no, but it's a great pleasure chatting with you.
And with you.
I've enjoyed it a great deal, and your kindness in coming up here. I'm, because of a back problem, it's hard for me to get around too easily. Every time I go out for a couple of blocks, I stop until the back catches up with me, and then
heavens.
Keep going.
Yeah.
You live with it. You can put up with a lot worse than that. Old soldiers don't complain.
I hear you.
Absolutely.
I hear you.
But I do appreciate you coming up here
My absolute pleasure.
and chatting with me.
Well, it is now about 20 after 1, so we've hit an hour, and I think that's probably enough to tax you with. You said you wanted to show us a document.
Yes, would you like to see it?
Yes.
This can stay here. This just for fun.
Oh, yeah.
Bathroom number 1.
Very good. I love the sink.
Bathroom number 2 over there. This was my son's room.
Oh, nice.
And I'll just show you a couple of pictures of him, and he weighs more than twice as much.
Oh, wow.
And this is this is my late father-in-law when he was playing for Syracuse.
Golly.
This man you will not recognize. He is a grand uncle, I guess is the word, of my dad's, and was one of the earliest members of the family to come to the United States. He came here in the 1860s, if I remember correctly.
From where?
He happened to come from what's now Germany. Most of Dad's people were Alsatians, and as a result, there was a strong mixture of French blood as well as German blood, because you know the Alsatians to this day haven't decided are they French or German.
Yes.
This guy you won't recognize. That's Pop Warner, one of the very great football coaches of all time.
Oh, wow.
And one of the big coaches. My son and my wife.
Oh.
Nice picture.
Lovely.
Oh, hey, you're doing well. You're doing well. My son, of course.
Oh, very good.
My son. And here's dear, let me put the light on. Here's dear old Rutgers.
Oh.
That's the scene. That's the scene that greets your eyes as you come onto the campus.
Oh.
I can put the light on if it helps. Wait a minute.
Nice.
That's great.
Got it?
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. Now, come next door. Bathroom number 2, just to show you. And here it is.
Oh.
Now, how good is your French?
Un petit peu. Croix de guerre. Wow.
Now, don't take that as a personal award for my bravery or anything like that. It was a unit award, given to the 445th Bomb Group and specifically the 703rd Squadron. But I'm very proud of it, and I'll milk it for all it's worth.
Awesome.
Okay, and this is the bedroom and the rest.
Very good.
Let me see if I have a picture. But my wife's, my wife.
These over here,
What are
Professor
what?
Sloan.
Those were my wife's, and I've kept them up.
Uh-huh.
And they come from, I think, Godey's Lady Book. Mm-hmm. And I see we're a little tilted right now.
That's fine.
Huh?
Very good.
Very good. Very good. And the football player again, my
Wow.
late father-in-law, and my mother-in-law.
Oh, lovely.
How about that?
Very lovely.
All these handsome people.
Oh, present company included.
Perfect. No.
Thank you so much.
Not at all.